Hi, Geometry. For our notes today, we're going to be using our formula sheet for Unit 6, so you'll want to get that out. So our first statement says to find the slope of the line containing the points 6, 5, and negative 2, 1. So on our formula sheet, you'll notice the formula for slope is m equals the difference in our y values over the difference in our x's. You might remember that from previous class. This was my rise because it's vertical distance, and this was my run because it was my horizontal distance. So for this problem, it doesn't really matter which y is y sub 2 or y sub 1. My y values, my xy and my xy, my y's are 5 and 1, and I can start with either one. So let's say I started with 5 minus 1. That's my y sub 2 minus y sub 1 in my formula. So I just subtracted my y's. Then I just have to be careful on the bottom in the denominator to utilize 6 first for my x's, since I used 5 first on top in my numerator for my y's. So my denominator becomes 6 minus a negative 2. We all know a minus is a plus. This is giving me 4 over 8, and that reduces to 1/2. And just real quickly, let's do it again using the 1 first for the y's in the numerator. So if instead I did 1 minus 5 in the numerator, then in the denominator, I would have to start with the negative 2. Since I started with the 1 on top, I'd have to start with its x on the bottom. And minus, and then my other x is 6. Now I'm getting negative 4 over a negative 8, and that's still positive 1/2 because a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So that's how I'd find my slope. So now let's talk about point slope form. You'll see the formula for that on your worksheet as well. But before I write that down, I want to write my slope formula one more time. My y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1 equals slope. And let's multiply both sides by that denominator, shall we? So I'm going to multiply both sides by my denominator. My denominator is going to cancel on the left, and I end up with y squared minus y sub 1 equals m times x squared minus x sub 1. This is really the point slope form you see on your formula sheet. It's written in the following way: y minus k equals m times x minus h, where my point that's on the line is hk. Notice the h is my x, notice the k is my y, and m then is my slope of my line. This is my new point slope formula. So let's try writing it for this example using the 6, 5. So going back to my 6, 5, then the equation of that line in point slope form would be y minus my y, so y minus the 5, which is the y of that coordinate, equals the slope 1/2 times x minus my h, or x minus the x of my coordinate, which in this case is 6. Let's try it with the negative 2, 1. I'll write it in a different color. So now I would still do my y minus my y, in this case it's 1, equals my slope, which is 1/2, times my x minus my x. Well, x minus the negative 2 would be x plus 2. These are two different equations for the same line, and these equations are in what we call point slope form. So this is a new form that you're learning. However, both of these equations are for the exact same line. Let's solve both of these for slope-intercept form. You might remember slope-intercept form. It's on our formula sheet, y equals mx plus b from previous years. So I'm going to use algebra and solve the red equation to put it into this form. Let's distribute that 1/2 first. So I'm getting y minus 5 equals 1/2 x. 1/2 times negative 6 is negative 3. So now let's add 5 to both sides, because in slope-intercept form, it's y equals. I want the y alone. So I get y equals 1/2 x plus 2. That would be the slope-intercept form of this equation. Let's do that for the blue equation as well. Let's distribute that 1/2. I get y minus 1 equals 1/2 x. 1/2 times 2, the 2's cancel and I get 1. I'm now going to add 1 to both sides to isolate my y. And you'll notice I get the exact same equation that I got from the red point slope form. That's because the red, the blue, and the green are all 3 equations for the exact same line. They're just in different forms. And the point slope being the form that we're going to get used to using in this lesson. So let's take a look at number 1. It says write the equation of the line containing 1, 3 and the slope of 2. So 1, 3 is like my HK. I really don't think of them as that. I always think of it as XY. So in point slope form, it's always my y minus my y coordinate equals my slope times my x minus my x coordinate. So y minus 3 equals my slope times x minus my x. This would be the equation in point slope form. So now it says to solve for slope-intercept form. So you guys, let's do that. Let me do that in a different color. I'm first going to distribute this 2 to get y minus 3 equals 2x minus 2. I'm now going to add 3 to both sides to get my y by itself. And I get y equals 2x plus 1. So this would be my slope-intercept form. So now C says to solve for standard form. If you go and look at your formula sheet, standard form is AX plus BY equals C. So my X and Y terms are both on the same side of the equation, equal to my integer term. So if I want to take my red equation and put it in this form, I need to move my X term over with my Y. So now I'm going to subtract 2x over here. And I get negative 2x plus y equals 1. Now, that's not considered standard form. Standard form has to have a positive integer for my a. So I'm going to take a minute. I don't want it to be a negative 2x. I'd like it to be a positive. So I'm going to multiply my entire equation by a negative 1. That's going to change the sign to positive 2x minus y equals negative 1. This would be considered my standard form. All 3 of these equations are equations of the exact same line. And I can actually graph from any of these equations. Let me first talk about graphing from point slope form. When you graph from point slope form, you're going to plot your point. So let's go plot this is our green equation. Let's go plot our 1, 3. So over 1 in the x direction, up 3 in the y. And my slope is 2. So that means my slope is 2 over 1. My rise is 2 and my run is 1. So we're going to go up 2 and we're going to go right 1. Up 2, right 1. We'll do a few stair steps. I'm also going to do the reverse. I'm going to think about it as down 2, left 1. So I'm going to go down 2, left 1, down 2, left 1, down 2, left 1. And after I've done a few of these stair steps, then I'll draw my line. So that's how I'd graph it from point slope form. Let's talk about graphing from slope-intercept form. When I graph from slope-intercept form, that's when my y equals mx plus b. So this is my y equals mx plus b, where b is my y-intercept. In this case, that's 1. So I'd plot my y-intercept on the y-axis, and I'd use my slope of 2, my 2 over 1, to do my stair steps. Up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1. I could go down 2, left 1. That's negative movement. And you'd be seeing that I'm getting the exact same line. These are both equations for the exact same line. I can easily graph from my point slope form or my slope intercept form. Let's take a look at number 2 down here. Number 2 says find the slope of the given line. So sometimes we found slope from graphs. That's when we would draw a slope triangle. You can really draw any triangle you want. It just has to connect 2 points. And then you see your change. So I'm going to go from my bottom point to my top point. So I have to go 1 right, which is a positive 1 in the x direction, and up 2, which is positive 2 in the y direction. So slope is my rise over my run. In this case, that's up 2, while my horizontal movement was a positive 1 to the right. So I would get my slope is 2. So then it says, write the equation point slope form using 3, 4. So 3, 4 is on my line. So I'm going to use my new y minus my y equals my slope times x minus my x. And I'm using 3, 4. So I have to remember to put the 4 in. That's my y minus my y. And then my x minus my x. So I have to make sure I put the 3 on the other side. Now it says to solve for slope-intercept form, or write from the graph. So we have been solving for slope-intercept form. We distribute that 2, we do our math, but I also want to remind you guys, this was my y-intercept. My b is negative 2. I can see it on my graph. I know my slope. So my slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. So in this case, my m is 2, and my b is negative 2. So that would be what I would get from the graph, or if I solved A with algebra. So it says solve for standard form. So I'm going to move my x term over. I'm going to subtract 2x over. So now my x and y are on the same side. I don't want you to think my coefficient's always a negative 2. It just happens to be like above. It's a negative and it's a 2, but it's really the negative I have an issue with. So I'm going to multiply the entire equation by negative 1, just so that first term, just so that first term is a positive integer coefficient. And then I get my standard form. So for number 3, it says to write an equation of the line containing 3, 1 with a slope of 2 in point slope form. So again, I'm going to have my y minus my y equals my slope times x minus my x. So in this case, that would be y minus 1 equals 2 times x minus 3. Now it wants me to write in slope-intercept form. This is when I distribute the 2, and I get y minus 1 equals 2x minus 6. I'm going to add 1 to both sides, and I get y equals 2x minus 5 for my slope-intercept form. And then my standard form, I'm going to just subtract my x term over to move it to the same side as the y. And weirdly, I know I wound up with a negative 2 again. Again, it could be any number. It does not have to be a 2. But it is a negative, so I'm going to multiply everything by a negative 1 because I really want that first term to be a positive integer coefficient. So sometimes we have an equation in standard form, and we're asked to find the slope and y-intercept. Whenever I have that, I'm going to solve for y, because what I want is my y equals mx plus b form. That gives me all the information I want. So what I want to do is solve this form. So I'm going to take my 3x minus 2y equals 8. I'm going to solve for y. So the first thing I'm going to move is my x term. And I get negative 2y equals, I like to write the x in front of the 8. It just looks more like my mx plus b form that I want. Then I'm going to divide everything by negative 2, and this time divide every single thing by negative 2 so that you don't make a mistake at this point. And my negative 2's cancel, and I get y equals positive 3/2. And we write that as a fraction out in front of x. That's my slope. It's kind of nice to see my rise over run, so we write it as a fraction. 3x over 2 is the same thing as 3/2 times just x, and so this is how we like to write it when we're doing equations with it. Positive 8 divided by negative 2 is a negative 4. So it looks like my slope then is 3/2, and my y-intercept is negative 4. Let's take a look at the next page. So this is notes for lesson 10 about parallel lines. We know from previous classes that parallel lines have the same slope. So if two lines have the same slope, then they would be parallel to each other. They would never cross. So it says to graph the line y equals negative 5/2 x plus 1. This is in my y equals mx plus b form. So I'm going to graph the 1. And then I'm going to use the -5/2 to do my stair steps. Now, when your slope is a negative, you either have to let the negative go with the numerator, or you can let the negative go with the denominator, but you can't let it go with both, or you've just changed it to positive slope. So I'm going to first do a couple points with the -5/2. So remember, this is rise over run. So I'm going to go down 5, which is negative in the y. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I'm going to go right to 1, 2, because that's positive in the x. Again, down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and right to. And I hope I'm putting these in the right spot because it's very small for my eyes. Now I'm going to use the +5/2. Positive 5 would be up in the y direction. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then -2 in the x would be left, 1, 2. And I could go up 5 again, but I'm going slightly off, so it's a little less accurate. But it looks like I'm getting this line right here. And I can tell it has negative slope because it's going downwards. It says, write the equation in point slope form using 2, -4. What? Does this line contain 2, -4? Let's go check it out. 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, it does. There's my 2, -4. So I could also write this equation. Up here, this is my slope-intercept form. But I could also write this equation in point slope form. That's my y minus my y equals my slope -5/2 times x minus my x. In this case, that'd be y minus a -4, which is +4, and x minus 2. So now it says to graph 2 more parallel lines and label them with equations. Well, graph 2 more. You know, really any line that has a slope of 5/2. So like you're literally, if I go back to the first bullet point, I'm literally just changing my y-intercept. Like I could do a +4, for instance. So over here, if I start at 4 and go up 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and right 2, I would get another line. Parallel. This blue line is y equals -5/2, x plus 4. Let me get a different color. Let's just change that y-intercept again. Y equals -5/2 x. Let's do minus 5. So I'm down here at -5 for my y-intercept, and I'll use the negative slope here. So down 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then right to positive for the x, and I get another line. This red line is parallel to the other two, and this is my y equals -5/2 x minus 5. So they always have to have the same slope, but a different y-intercept in those cases. Write the equation of the line parallel to this line passing through this point. So if it's parallel, they have the same slope. So I know my slope is 2. And this is my point, so I can write this in point slope form. That's my y minus my y equals my slope times my x minus my x. On our formula sheet, that's our y minus k equals m times x minus h. So in this case, it's y minus 1 equals 2 times x minus a -4, or x plus 4. Let's take a look at the next one. Parallel to this, so I know my slope is 3/4, passing through this point in point slope form. Okay, so y minus my y minus 2 equals my slope times x minus 0. And can I drop that? If I want to drop that and just say 3/4 x, I totally could, you guys. Minus 0 is the same thing as just x. Write the equation of the line parallel to the line containing those 2 points and passing through this one. Oh, these 2 points are where I'm going to get my slope. I got to use my slope formula. What was that? The difference in my y's. So I have to start with the 3 or 5. It doesn't really matter. But since I started with the 3 on the bottom, I'll start with the 2. 2 minus 6. So 3 minus 5 is what? -2. And 2 minus 6 is what? -4. And when I reduce that, I'm getting what? +1/2. Okay, that's my slope. So to write the equation of the line parallel in point slope form, so y minus my y, so y minus a -1 is what? +1 equals my slope times x minus my x. this would be my answer. What is the slope of the line parallel to this line? Well, if I want to know my slope, that means I need to solve for y. I'd like the y equals mx plus b form. So I'm going to subtract 5x from both sides. I get negative 3y equals 4 minus, well, you know what? I can totally do that. But I do like to write the negative 5x first because it looks more like the form for kids that are struggling with that part. Now, when I go to divide by the negative 3, I want to divide every single thing by negative 3. So I'm getting y equals positive 5/3 x minus 4/3. So my y-intercept would be like negative 1 1/3 on my y-axis. Let's talk about perpendicular lines now. So let's look at perpendicular lines. It says on the graph above, graph the line perpendicular to the line shown with the y-intercept of 5. So let me see if I can go back up. So it wants to be perpendicular. This is where we have to remember that perpendicular lines have opposite, reciprocal slope. So if my slope up here was negative 5/2, then my perpendicular slope, notice my perpendicular symbol in front of the m, is the opposite reciprocal. So the reciprocal would give me 2/5. And the opposite of being negative would be positive. So I'm actually going to use a different color. It's going to have to be yellow. And it said to graph the line that is perpendicular with a y-intercept of 5. So my y-intercept of 5 is right here that I just tried to do in yellow. And now my slope is 2, 5. 2 in the y direction, 5 in the x. So up 2, and then left 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, my yellow pen is kind of all over. And I'm getting this yellow line. And this yellow line appears to be perpendicular to all three of my other lines because my slope is perpendicular slope, or that opposite reciprocal. Let me head back down to the bottom of our page. So in question number 1, it says write the equation of the line perpendicular to this one passing through this point. So if the slope of this line is 2, or 2/1 helps kids with this, then I know my perpendicular slope would be the opposite reciprocal. The reciprocal gives me 1/2, the opposite makes it negative. So in point slope form, I'd have y minus my y equals my slope times x minus my x, or minus is a plus 4. It says write the equation of the line perpendicular. Well, perpendicular to 3/4, if the slope is 3/4, my perpendicular slope would be the reciprocal, and it's the opposite reciprocal. So I would have y minus my y equals my slope times x minus my x, and of course you could just write that as negative 4/3 x. It says write the equation of the line perpendicular to the line containing these 2 points and passing through 2, -1 in point slope form. So I need to calculate the slope of this red line, the one containing those 2 points first. So the difference in my y's, and I started with the 7, so I'm going to start with the 1 over the difference in my x's, gives me 4 over -1, or -4 over 1. You could think about it either way. So my perpendicular slope would be the reciprocal of that, and it would be opposite, which now makes it positive. So it looks like my equation would be y minus my y minus -1 is plus 1, equals 1/4 x minus my x. What is the slope of the line perpendicular to this one? Let's find the slope of this line first. It's in standard form, so I'm going to solve for y. And I get 2y equals -8x plus 7. I'm going to divide everything by 2. I'm getting y equals -4x plus 7/2, or 3.5. So it looks like the slope of that line is -4, or -4/1. So the slope of the line perpendicular would be the reciprocal of that, and the opposite sign, or positive 1/4. Thank you so much.